Welcome to I See What You Mean, a podcast about how people get on the same page or don't, or perhaps shouldn't. Today my guest is Joe Launi. Joe is a founder and owner of Project Management Experts in Leesburg, Virginia, and a longtime friend and consulting colleague. Joe, welcome to the show.
Hi, Lou. Thanks for having us.
You're welcome. I'm looking forward to it. Give us a short bio so listeners know something about you.
PME, Project Management Experts, has been around since 2008 or so, and we're a project management and agile training company. We have over 30 instructor-led project management classes, agile classes, leadership classes, and we primarily work with the federal government. That's our market here in the Washington, D.C. area. Mm-hmm. But we also offer over 300 e-learning online on-demand courses for students that either don't have the time or need to get quick training to maintain their certifications, et cetera. So it's fun.
That's
I enjoy
nice.
it, and I like helping people, and I like helping people's careers, and it's fun. So I'm glad to be with you.
Before you began the training, you were a project manager in some software development and other.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, it's over. I stopped counting. It's been 35 years. I started with Ernst & Young, although back when I was with them, they were Arthur Young. Some of the old school folks would remember Arthur Young. So that's where I got my start in project management. It was probably in the 90s I really got interested in best practices. I mean, I thought there had to be a method to this madness. And that's about the time where the Project Management Institute was starting to really take a hold in our industry and develop practices and create a common way of addressing and managing projects. So I worked in PMOs and project management offices and had a lot of fun doing that, and decided my last job would be working for myself.
Yeah.
So
excellent. Well, we have a lot to talk about when it comes to project management and getting on the same page. I'm not certified, although you tried to certify me. I just wasn't. I wasn't available. I could have used that on-demand opportunity about 8 years ago.
Takes a commitment.
And I didn't have the time, but I'm well aware of the depth and breadth of project management as a proper practice, like the PMBOK as a standard, right? The project management body of knowledge, and it's broad and it's deep. So there's a lot that people have to get on the same page about. But let's start with just a broad question to you. What does it mean for people to be on the same page in a project? There's so many roles, so many people, so many things. What's it mean?
Yeah, and it's a good question, and it on face value it feels very black and white, but being on the same page is, at least in my mind, is the equivalent of asking, what is the meaning of life? I mean, it's just
that broad.
It's that broad. And the reason I say this is because this is a communication question. I mean, this is, how do we communicate effectively? Why do we communicate? We communicate, especially in project work. We communicate because we have a clearly defined goal. Not always, especially in certain agile-related projects, but we have a general goal, and we all have to get there. We as a team, we as a project team have to get there, and we've got to get there together. And it helps to be on the same page, but getting there is difficult because, again, we're talking about communication. We're talking about the old sender and receiver model, where we're both parties are communicating and we're refining our messages so that we're on the same page. And that's where the rubber hits the road, because when we communicate, we bring with us so much baggage. We bring in our upbringing, our communications, our personality styles, our previous experiences, in just about everything that we communicate.
Yeah.
And it can be relatively simple. For example, I can remember being a kid, growing up, and every morning my mother would yell up the steps, don't forget to make your bed, right? and to this day, in my house, my wife and I, my job is to make the bed in the morning. It's probably because I'm the last one out of it. She gets up earlier than I do. And, And occasionally she'll say to me, did you make the bed? And my first response is, stop nagging me. You know? And then I know where it comes from. It comes from,
Your mother.
being a teenager and being told, hey, did you make your bed?
That's funny.
And she's not doing anything wrong. I mean, it's a matter of we bring with us
Yeah.
all
Yeah.
that with us in
Yeah.
every communication that so are we on the same page? Well, frankly, the bed's made.
Right. Right.
So we're on the same page. But what I'm hearing and what she's communicating is sometimes totally different things. So that's just a simple example. But anytime we communicate,
Yeah.
we bring that background, we bring that baggage, if you will,
Well, and what's
into the communication.
you're so right. And what's so powerful about that? The example is powerful because it's simple. So if there can be different meanings meant or not meant in such a simple communication, we know how complicated communication can be at work on a project when you've got people on a project team representing different parts of an organization, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they all live in their own worlds, meaning, and those worlds are big. If you come from production or delivery, or you come from working with the customer, or you come from IT or HR, there's a whole world unto itself that you,
Yep.
like you said, the baggage you bring to the meet, you bring to the
Yep.
project.
That's
And
right.
there's ways in which there's things that we see in a situation and not other things.
Mm-hmm.
And there's things that we make of a situation and not other things.
Mm-hmm.
And there's things that we think we should do about a situation as a means to an end and not other things. If you've got 2 people or 10 people doing that independently, it gets complicated.
It is.
And so the
It's very
challenge in
complicated.
the challenge in any relationship is to align that. And and you're absolutely right. It's communication is the means or the mechanism by which we try to align all those things.
Mm-hmm.
So what
Well,
makes for good communication on a project team to manage the kind of things we've just described?
well, I think that I think Stephen Covey said it best when he said, and I'm paraphrasing, to be understood, we must first seek to understand.
Yeah.
And I think what he actually said was, you must first seek to understand and then seek to be understood.
Yeah.
So my answer to that question is, we have to listen. We have to active listening. We have to provide feedback. We have to negotiate. The biggest thing is empathy and understanding, even though we don't agree.
Right.
I'll give you an example, Lou. Just very recently, I have a small cadre of instructors, and in my industry, it's not uncommon for training companies to grab instructors from industry to jump in and teach a class
Right.
and then go away. They're not employees, but they're independent contractors.
Right.
Now, I try to keep the same small cadre of instructors, but I had one particular instructor. We had a discussion. She told me as we were coming out of COVID in November and December, all of my instructors except one is vaccinated.
Mm-hmm.
And she told me, she said, Joe, look, I'm just not comfortable getting vaccinated. And she sent this in an email, and I said, oh, God, this is going to be a problem.
Mm-hmm.
Because, I'm responsible for giving you my perspective. I'm responsible for, at the very minimum, when students and instructors show up to teach for PME, at a very minimum, it's an expectation that they will be safe,
Mm-hmm.
that they won't leave there being sick or even getting very sick and dying.
Right.
And I'm talking about everybody, not just the students, but my instructors as well.
Right.
And I take that very seriously. And she told me, and then I decided, I said, okay, look, you and I need to talk a little bit. I need to understand. Now, I'm fully
Sure.
vaccinated and boosted, as are all of my other instructors except one. And we had a talk, and I told myself going into that conversation, I was going to really have to listen to what she had to say.
There you go. Okay.
And I totally, in all fairness, I don't agree with her. She has some religious issues with it. She has and she's angry with the pharmaceutical companies, and she has elderly parents that she's helping take care of. But I listened, and I said, and she told me, she explained her position. And she said, look, I understand. She goes, I take a test daily. I'll take a test before I go into class.
Interesting.
But I listened to her, and I really tried to understand her perspective. And I explained to her too my perspective, and I explained to her, look,
Yeah.
it feels like to me that I'm more concerned about your health than you're concerned about your own health. And we laughed, and she said, yeah, but I'm willing to take the
She's
risk
taking that risk, right?
with that.
Right.
And I said,
Which
I
is her
respect
choice.
that, which is her choice.
But
Now,
you can't let the students take that risk without, that's not right.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And, and by the way, she's a great instructor, and I'm not afraid to say that, that I need her.
Yeah.
I mean, she's good instructor. She's knowledgeable.
Yeah.
She has the certifications that she needs in order to teach certain classes that we offer.
Yeah.
And I like her very much. She's not somebody that I dislike.
Yeah. If she went away, you wouldn't care. Right.
Right. And so I care about her, and I care about my students, and I explained that to her. But I listened. I could have said to her, look, hey, if you're not vaccinated, we can't use you, period.
Right.
I could have made a mandate.
Prerogative, yeah.
Yeah, and she's not an employee.
Right.
So it would be very easy for me to say, hey, and I can find other instructors, to be honest with you, but I don't want to.
Well, let me ask you a question, because you have Covey's statement as the bottom of your emails. I know that it is important to you.
Yeah.
I think it's phenomenal that you prepped yourself for the call with her by saying, I got to listen.
Yeah.
Because what that tells me, I'm gonna say this, and you tell me if I'm right or wrong. What that tells me is you were aware of your own reaction to her email. You were aware of opinions, concerns, a position you had as the owner of the business. Those are your contracts with the federal government, right?
Yeah.
So you were aware of those things, but you didn't take an approach to the call where you were going to be sure that you didn't start with those things. You started with listening. So where did you learn along the way? This is a personal thing. It doesn't have to do with project management, but where did you learn along the way to check yourself that way? To check yourself and say, let me hear and see what I learn, because then it might change what I think or it might not, but I'm in a different position to speak after I've heard.
Yeah. That's a good question. And, when I think back on my career, I've always, and it's grown over the years, I've always believed in more of a collaborative approach. I've always believed in building relationships with people. Never totally bought into command and control type attitude where I'm in charge, you do what I say, and it's all about what I want and everybody else must follow.
Yeah.
And so when I found myself in cultures that didn't buy into that.
Yeah.
I remember years ago, I worked for a company and I was running a project management office, and I was a senior director, and my vice president decided to join one of my project meetings. And I was trying to implement or recommending we implement some changes in how we manage projects. It put it in a nutshell. And I was getting feedback. From various team members. What do you think about this? Will this work? And the reason I was getting it, because, I was relatively new with the company, and some of these folks had been in the company 6-7 years.
Sure.
So even though, I'm the leader or the manager, it would be foolish for me to not to go into the, into the lieutenants and say, well, what do you all think of this?
Yeah, right.
Is this going to work? And when I did this, my vice president shot a look at me. It's one of those piercing looks. He shot a look at me, and I pulled him aside after the meeting, and I asked him, I said, hey, what was that about? And he says, do you have any questions or comments? And he looked at me and says, you're the director. You don't ask for feedback. You do it. It shocked me. It took me off guard.
Sure did.
I didn't last in that company much long after that.
There you go.
And but I just knew it wasn't my style.
When you were speaking, I was thinking, I want you to pick up, I was thinking about your personality and style. So I think that's where I wanted to ask you.
Well, yeah, I think for me it's a personality thing. Remember, you and I came up in the 80s and the 90s when organizations were running mostly in a command and control.
There was still that. What was that? The Henry Ford,
Yeah,
that industrial era
exactly.
mindset. Yeah, yeah.
Exactly.
The
And the
assembly line.
Japanese
Yeah,
and the Japanese taught us that if you're a frontline worker in a factory, you can stop the plant, you can stop the assembly line, and management must come down and listen to you and engage with you.
yeah.
And they found that it created better products,
Better quality.
right?
Total quality.
Quality products,
Okay,
exactly.
so let's go back to your story. I didn't mean to
Yeah.
cut you off. I wanted to ask you. I
Hmm.
think it's most of what people think when they think of communication is sending. You mentioned the send receiver
Yeah.
model, and most of what
Yeah.
people think is sending. And if you Google effective communication, most of what you see is about how to send better, how to be
Right.
clearer, how to be more persuasive, all those, right? And it's a $1 billion industry, right?
Hmm.
There's stuff out there about listening, but
Hmm.
it gets the minority emphasis
Hmm.
in the it's the
Hmm.
minority note, it's the lighter note in the symphony.
Hmm.
But you said approaching the call, I knew I had to listen. So then
Hmm.
how did it go? I think that's great that you caught yourself that way and that you trained yourself that way.
Yeah.
How did it
Yeah.
go?
It was a first of all, it was a conscious
Right,
effort.
right.
I think for a lot of us that doesn't come naturally. We want to get our point across, and we'll do whatever we can to make sure we're heard.
Mm-hmm.
But in this situation, I knew I had to consciously say I need to hear her out.
So when she was
And
speaking, were you picking up on
well,
things she said and asking more about them? Were you like
yeah,
checking your own impulse to jump in and
yeah. Now with her, it's easy. Now it varies with the individual. With
okay,
her, it's easy
fair
because
enough. Yeah.
we have a good
Right.
relationship. She respects me.
Right.
I respect her.
There you go. Okay.
And so it was easier. Some people it's just harder
Yeah.
to
True.
listen to.
True.
So when I jumped in, I decided I needed to listen first, and I needed to understand what the issues were. And I was very happy to hear that the issues were not, it was less about, I don't believe the vaccine works, or it wasn't anything, it wasn't conspiracy theories. There were heartfelt things with her that were important. And so frankly, when I listened to her and I got her feedback, I felt much better because this wasn't based in her opinions weren't based in lies and weren't based. Now I've had other conversations with family members that were totally based in lies, and that's much harder. But it can be done if you consciously go into it
Yeah,
with
you're
that
right.
attitude.
You're
I
right.
will listen first. But I think, Lou, it's important, in my view anyway, it's important to consciously say to yourself, I will go in and I will start with listening.
Mm-hmm.
I will start. And doesn't mean that you're there to be bowled over,
No, no, no.
right? You're there to have an opinion. You're there to express yourself.
You might be there
You're
to
there to
decide.
persuade,
Yeah.
yes, and to make a decision.
Yeah. So you heard things that you could respect, and then that
Yes.
conversation went well. Then I know you.
Hmm.
We know it for 20 years now. I know that what you would have said to her, you would have delivered respectfully. Could I can imagine that conversation going well,
Hmm.
which is what you said it did. And
Hmm.
you're still working with her, and the government's shutting down again, and you could do things remotely, and she's going to do that, right?
Yeah.
Let's switch gears to a project
Hmm.
team where you're in your training or back when you were, a project manager. Let's set the stage. It's a project meeting. And it could be a kickoff, but let's just say we're into a project and there's some kind of working meeting or status meeting about how things are going. And
Hmm. Hmm.
most people don't go into those meetings with the first thought being that they should listen.
Yeah.
They go in there
Yeah.
with the first thought that, and some of them might be expected to speak about some aspect
Hmm.
of the schedule or the budget or something in the project,
Hmm.
right? Quality.
Hmm.
And so they're ready to speak, and most people are ready to speak.
Hmm.
What do you see happen in those group discussions, or what do you teach about the balance of listening? Do you use Covey's line in your training? Do you recommend students listen and to understand and then have something to say?
Let's talk about from my experience, and let me comment academically because
Sure,
there are academic guidelines that we teach when we're
sure.
teaching project management. Well, let me start with that.
All
The
right.
academic is, then the best practice is, and what we've been teaching for the last 3 to 4 years or so, is that every team, when that team forms, should have a what we call a team charter.
Right.
And a team charter it works best when it's negotiated with the team.
Right.
The team does it. The team facilitates it. The project manager, I think, needs to be involved in it, certainly. But the team writes the team charter, and the team charter sets what is the goal? How are we going to function as a team? How will we function in meetings? What is the, like, for example, we will show up at meetings and you must have an agenda.
Mm-hmm.
And part of one of the bullet points in a team charter would be that everybody should get an opportunity to share equally.
Mm-hmm.
And you could even have a bullet point that everybody must try to listen and to understand
Mm-hmm.
each other's perspectives.
Mm-hmm.
So you can actually build that into a handwritten document.
Sure.
And it becomes a proclamation that this is how you'll function together. And we're teaching that now.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that's never been, I've been doing this. I mean, I've been teaching project management since '08 or so, but I did it before that.
Sure.
And it's only been in the last few years that this has been a formal project artifact that is created along the way. So there's an academic reason to do this. There's an academic practice in doing this. Now, putting that aside for a second, I think early in the project, it's good for the project manager to lay that groundwork and to state early in the project, look, we want to respect each other and we want to listen to each other and we want to share each other's ideas. But, and I think the but, although I hate throwing buts in, but the but is we still got to get things done, folks.
Right.
Right. And if we can collaborate, if we can reach consensus together, that's a good thing. But there will be times that I'm going to have to say, folks, look, we got to move on. Look, the customer wants this, and it's time to make and go this direction.
Let's take just a half step back. There's some things in the PMBOK that recommend or stipulate what should be in a charter, but I heard what you said a little bit differently. Besides some things that maybe should formally be in there, like you said, for academic reasons, it's also useful, especially like you said, if the team develops it, it's useful for people to put in there as guidelines for their own behavior, right?
Yep.
These are guidelines for their behavior, how they want to interact with each other. Somebody I knew in DC who worked for, I knew her when she was a staff to the a congressional commission looking at acquisition reform.
Mm-hmm.
Told me one time she's civilian, but she was on an Air Force project team, and they came up with guidelines like that of their own.
Mm-hmm.
Not so much the formal or official ones, but their own operating rules. For example, they agreed nobody on a team, people could report to 5 or 10 different chains of command, right?
Yeah.
Nobody on the team would take something outside the team until it had been vetted by the team first. Meaning you give the team a chance to work on something together. If you've got to take it up a chain of command, everybody understands that.
Mm-hmm.
But don't end run the team to do it. Bring it to the team first, especially if it's a problem. Bring the problem to the team first. She said that it was the highest performing team she was ever on. I mean, the culture of that team, the esprit de corps and the team culture just was at the highest level she'd ever worked with.
Yep.
And I think it was it could have been the personalities, it could have been the project, it could have been a few things, but what she was telling me was it was partly because we said, here's how we're going to work together, and they abided by it. They stuck to it.
Mm-hmm.
So then you're developing trust, right?
Exactly.
You're developing respect for each other. You might give yourselves an opportunity to problem solve, which you could have circumvented if you'd acted indifferent. And then you start to learn, geez, Joe thinks of things this way. I don't. I want to bring this up to him because now I want to get a perspective I don't usually have. Or, Amy's always hard charging, but she keeps us lined up to you start to respect the differences that people have, and maybe optimize with them.
Exactly. And it's interesting. Were you talking? Was this a military project?
Yeah.
The reason I say that is because I teach a lot of military folks. I just got back from Colorado at Fort Carson, and I taught. There were 19. There were half the class were officers, half the class were non-coms. But you see it, and they'll tell you you see it in the military. I mean, you're advising. You have junior people advising
Yeah.
senior officers.
Yeah.
At the major and the colonel level,
Yeah.
but in a classroom, you can't tell who's in charge, and it's because they're collaborating. They're used to
They
collaborating
really are.
together. And you see that in the Pentagon.
They
I mean,
really are.
we think that there's a very top-down structure, and
They're-
on an org chart, it is very top-down.
It is.
But they're not adverse to collaborating.
No.
They're not adverse to sharing ideas. As a matter of fact, it's an expectation
It is.
that you will advise. If you're a lieutenant or a captain, it's expected that you will advise the major or the colonel, whoever's running your unit, that you will provide them with the information that they need and the advice that they need to run their unit. It's interesting because
Yeah.
the military demonstrates this better than the commercial world.
It can. I was years ago when we were both in Leesburg, I was doing some the Air Force put all of its officers through interest-based negotiation training. They wanted that particular form of negotiation training.
Yeah.
And so I'm
And
talking
I know that's your
about
background too.
Yep. Now I'm talking about there are generals in these classes.
Yep.
Nobody was exempt. Every officer went through like a 3.5-day training, Joe. It's not a small commitment of time.
Right.
I was chatting with a general at a break, and he said, when I was a young officer, I looked up the chain of command and couldn't wait to climb up there because I thought that's where all the decisions were made. And he said, now that I'm a general, he said, I realize my job is to make sure everybody below me is successful at their jobs.
Yeah, exactly.
It just flipped for him as he went up the chain of command. And it is much more of that mindset of we're gonna win or lose together.
Right. Right. Well, you just defined the definition of servant leadership.
Right.
In describing your example with the general. And I really feel that our industry, whether you're in project management or otherwise, is moving that direction. At least I hope so. We're moving away from command and control towards more of a servant leadership model where we're encouraging. Our job as leaders is to make sure we're creating other good leaders and we're supporting them and get the job done.
And that's very much inculcated in the military culture for a number of reasons, one of which is they move so often.
Yeah.
It's your job to train your replacement because you're going to rotate out at some point in time. I don't mean in 15 years, maybe 2. Maybe 1, right? You're going to rotate out and you train your replacement, and there's that ethic of succession plan, right? Mm-hmm. You know Bob Nunnally because you worked with him and trained him. Remember Bob's name? And he's a retired Air Force colonel, and he was in the Air Force, I don't know, 20 years ago, 15 years ago. And so at that time, I had a conversation with him within the last couple of years about the appropriate use of command and control. And there's times when it's appropriate, like in dangerous situations, in crisis situations. Someone's got to be in command and others have to follow.
Yeah.
And that's what you're in that role for. But apart from those situations, he said the fact that somebody can command someone, he said, is sometimes, and he emphasized it like this, Joe, he said, it's the worst way to talk to somebody. He couldn't emphasize enough. That's not the way, if you're senior, anybody will do what you tell them they have. But that's not how you get the best out of them.
No.
Bob's real big on the servant leader, philosophy too, and I know you are. Here's an interesting thing, Joe. Project management and the PMBOK are not the same thing. You can manage projects without the PMBOK, and it might go well or not. But the PMBOK is a de facto standard. It's sort of command and control.
And it's a guideline.
Right.
It's not a mandate.
But
we have to be careful. A lot of people think that, I have to manage to do it right way. I have to manage the way it's textbook.
That's where I was going with it, because it's got the feeling to it of command and control. Mm-hmm. Because it's a standard. So many intelligent people. You look through the preface of that thing.
Yeah.
So many experienced and intelligent people spent so many thousands of hours putting it together.
Yeah.
There are best practices for a reason, and so you don't want to not follow best practices. So you can accidentally or inadvertently adopt a command and control attitude or approach when you're doing project management, whether you're the project manager or you're running a piece of a project, especially if they're
Yep.
big projects.
Yeah.
So, what are you
Exactly.
doing with that these days in training, and what are you seeing
Well,
happen?
well, I think that it's interesting you bring that up because the Project Management Institute, I think, recognized that. And if you look at the new PMBOK and your experiences, at least from a PMBOK perspective, have been from, I think, PMBOK 5 and 6.
Yeah.
Now, PMBOK 7, PMBOK's all that structure, all that step by step,
Yeah.
all that command and control, all that has been taken out of the new
No
PMBOK.
kidding.
PMBOK 7 is much more, it's like they played 52 card pickup with all the processes. And so they've totally, they've destructured, if you will, all of those processes. And I mean, there's for example, the new test, the new PMBOK or the new PMP exam,
Uh-huh.
I think 50% of it is, no, I'm sorry, 42% of it is about people. It's about managing. It's about leading. It's about building
Okay.
teams.
Okay.
And they've never done that. It's always been about
The
structure, structure,
processes. Yeah.
structure,
Right.
initiating, planning, executing.
Yeah. Right.
And they took all that out. But the important stuff is still there, especially in planning. But it's much more about people, leadership, and process. I mean, people and leadership and team building and building a high performing team. All the things that we've been discussing
Okay.
has been moved into the new versions of the new version of the PMBOK. And even PMI is saying, "Hey, this PMBOK is not the end of all ends." I mean, they keep telling us, don't tell people that the test is only about the PMBOK. The test is based upon 6 or 7
Ah.
different periodicals, and the PMBOK is just one of them.
Okay.
So they're
Interesting.
loosening it up on all that.
Interesting. Well.
So, but your point is well taken because we have to think as project managers, which are leaders. I mean, project managers
Yes,
should
they
be
are.
more than just dictators. They should be,
Yeah.
and I think this is the challenge because we have to know as project managers when to manage, meaning when to command and control, and when to lead and when to collaborate. And we've got to be able to float between those two. And I think the new PMBOK, is trying to go
Taking a
that
step in that
direction.
direction. Yeah, that's interesting.
And I think it's a positive direction.
Uh
It was
huh.
awkward when we first got it and had to teach it. And I'm like, oh my God, this is a total different mindset. The leader in me felt, wow, this is a good idea. The trainer in me said, oh my God, I got to relearn. I got to readjust on how I do all this stuff and how I
Yeah.
teach all this
Yeah.
stuff. But it's a good thing. And I'm adjusting. It's been a year now, so I'm adjusting. I've taught it, I don't know, 6, 7 times last year.
Yeah.
So I'm adjusting to it. We're changing all of our curriculum to adjust to it
Wow.
because we have to move with,
Sure.
our classes have to
Sure.
move with the industry. So,
Sure. Do you see people aspiring to, let's say, lead by listening? Here's what I was thinking of. Here's what came back to me: the definition of on the same page. I have an operating definition, a definition I use, but I want to share another one with you. Mine is
mhm,
agreeing enough to take a next step together.
mhm,
So we don't talk about some total or final agreement, but Lou and Joe are agreeing enough to double check the numbers in that budget or to prototype something. We're agreeing enough to take a next step together to see what we find.
mhm.
I was talking to someone else you trained, Rick Dudek.
Yeah.
Rick and I recorded an episode a couple months ago. It's just going to get published this week. And he had a
Mhm,
definition that he said that being on the same page meant I understood what you understand about a situation. I don't have to agree, but I understand how you see it and why you
Yep.
see it that way.
Yep.
And you understand how I see it and why I see it that way. Now, to me, that's what you did when you had the call with your colleague.
Mhm,
When you said, I'm going to go in and listen,
yep.
it didn't mean you were going to abandon what you had to say.
Right.
It meant you wanted to know what was on her mind before you spoke because you might learn
Mhm,
something. You
yeah.
might it might change, it might make a difference in what you were going to say. And if it didn't, at least it's a more collegial conversation, right?
Right.
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 So to
Exactly.
understand what someone else understands about a situation I think gives 2 people or 5 people or 10 people an opportunity to build very profound shared knowledge.
Hmm.
If I'm budget and you're IT or you're production or you represent the customer or you're focused on quality stakeholders, if I understand what you understand about a situation, we have more to work with.
Exactly.
Is that what you
Exactly.
see? Is that how's that square with how you see movement in the industry, a role of leading in a different way, of
Yep.
teams working in a different way?
To answer are you asking me? Do I see the
Yeah,
industry moving this way?
how's that fit? What
I
do you?
the best way to answer that is I hope so. I mean, I think that I see it a little bit more.
Hmm.
I think the industry sees, for example, you'll see servant leadership in PMBOK 7. I mean,
Hmm.
it's all over the place.
That's interesting.
And the students that I've taught in
That's
PMP
interesting.
prep have told me, Joe, there was a whole bunch of questions on servant leadership, right? So you see that those that are smarter than me in project management and the ways of the industry, I mean, PMI does exclusive,
Yeah,
studies
yeah,
and on what the industry is moving towards. I mean, my exposure is my experience
sure,
and my exposure with the folks that I teach.
right.
And I see more of this.
Yeah,
Now they see a much bigger picture.
good
So
for
the answer to your
PMI.
question is yes, I think we're moving that direction.
Good for PMI.
Yeah. And but I got to stress that this is hard.
It is.
Certainly, this. I mean, it's easy, and I think that Bob Nunley was telling you this. Hey, anybody can say, "You do as I say,"
Yeah,
right? You follow me.
it's easy.
You are loyal to me. You do as I say. Period. That's easy. Anybody can do that.
Yeah,
But actually telling your team members that, look, I care about you. I want to see you succeed.
yeah,
I want to prepare you for the next
yeah,
job.
yeah,
Go into your customers and say, hey, look, what you want to do, we're going to do our best to get you there. But be prepared. This is not in your best interest, or this may not be this
yeah,
may not be in
yeah.
what
A
society's
kind
best interest
of
is.
honest
So
conversation.
that's
Yeah.
hard.
Well, what
you
else
know,
is hard is it changes the role of the leader. It changes the role of the team. Now, team members
exactly.
have a different expectation for how they step up to conversation. So,
Hmm.
what we're talking about changes the conversation.
Hmm.
So everybody's got to step up to a different conversation, and that's hard.
Right. That's right.
I,
Yeah.
I'd like to maybe just keep track of my schedule on Microsoft Project and report.
Hmm.
No,
Exactly.
now if you're saying to me, if you're the PM saying, yeah, okay, thanks for the report, but talk to us about what you think or what you know is going on with
Right.
these 2 or 3 streams, right? I got to engage in a different way.
Hmm. Yeah.
What do
You
you
do.
do? What's happening in the training where or how do students react to that notion? Some probably like it, some maybe less so. But what do you see?
Well, we have to, as an instructor, we have to walk that tightrope
Yeah,
because we got to teach both.
yeah,
I got to tell students, look, your schedule is important. I mean, you're communicating. You don't have endless time. You
right,
don't have endless resource. You don't
right,
have endless dollars.
right.
So you got to know when you're on schedule. You got to know when you're slipping. And
Yeah,
that's the first step is to know that you're slipping and understand how bad it is and
yeah,
what the issue is
yeah,
and understand can you bring it back and how do you communicate that. So the first thing is you lead with facts. You lead with data. And
yeah,
then the next step is then you open your mind and say, okay, what can we do here, folks?
yeah,
What are your ideas?
yeah, yeah.
And I think that I hope I'm answering your question,
That's a
but
good point.
I think that you have to lead with data, but you got to lead with humility, right? In other words, you got to
Yeah,
say, I've been surrounded by team members, and I look them in the eye and I said, look, I may not say this directly, but hey, you're a lot more knowledgeable about this than I am,
yeah, sure.
right? I
Yeah,
mean, you see the bigger picture. I'm just a lowly project manager trying to communicate and keep this thing on track. And I think that's hard for a lot of PMs to delegate their control to somebody smarter. I hate to use the term smarter. Let's use the term
sure.
more
About
knowledgeable about
some
the
aspect
impacts
of
than
right,
than than
right,
I am.
right.
And we got to do that. And we have to recognize that that's not weakness. That's strength,
Yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah. Exactly.
To be able to go to an expert team member. And by the way, expert judgment is all over the PMBOK, right? So we got to be able to go to our experts and say, what do you think? How can we fix this? and be
Well,
able to delegate and have the humility to do that. And that's hard. I mean, that's hard for a lot. It was hard for me as I was coming up.
that's a good point.
But when
Another
you
good.
but when you realize a good servant leader says, I'm gonna let go
Yeah.
of my I'm going to let go of my need to control and my need to be seen as the authority figure, and I'm going to do what's best for this project and what's best for my team, and I'm going to ask them what they think is best. And I might control the decision, but it doesn't mean I have to control all the input.
Yeah, right.
And so this is what we try to teach in our classes, is that practice a little humility.
That's a
Don't be
good.
afraid to
Yeah,
delegate or to share. Maybe that's a better word, to share your
yeah.
need for control with others around you.
Well, I love the distinction between controlling the inputs and controlling the decision, which is,
Hmm.
let's say, as an output. Another person
Hmm.
you know, Tom Oates,
Hmm.
talks about he and I have recorded a podcast. He talks about using the intelligence of his team.
Hmm.
So he runs a national program for a contractor. He doesn't know what his people, 90 people on his team across the country, know about 90
Hmm.
things, right? You can't. And so
Right.
you're either going to, in his phrase was, he does what you and I are talking about, it as
Hmm.
a means to the end of using the intelligence of the people who know best
Hmm.
and bringing it together.
Hmm.
It's his job maybe more to bring it, to open up the avenues and bring it together. It's
Hmm.
not his job to know what they know.
Right.
I think we all want to be seen as experts. We all want to be seen as strong. We all want to be seen as capable, especially if you're in a leadership
Hmm.
role. You might be some image or expectations you have about what that means and how you think you should act.
Hmm.
Nunley made the comment that you're really you're responsible for the results. And this is part of what you're saying. You're
Hmm.
responsible for the You're not responsible for knowing everything.
Right.
You're responsible for the results.
Right.
You better get out of your own way,
Exactly.
to get
Exactly.
input from your team to get the best
Exactly.
result. Otherwise, the result you deliver could be inferior. And that's what's going to happen because nobody
Yep.
can know what they need to know about
Everything.
even a big task, let alone a project. Yeah. Let alone a
Right.
program.
Right.
Right. The bigger you go in scale, nobody can know all those things.
Exactly. Exactly. And I agree with you. And I like the way you said it. Get out of the way. Sometimes the best leaders just know when to get out of the way
Yeah.
and let the people do the work.
There's a.
And those that are smart. I share a funny story when I teach a class. We'll go through test questions,
Uh huh.
and I tell my students, if you get a test question and you're clueless
Uh huh.
of the answer,
Uh-huh.
I mean, absolutely clueless, and you have no idea, and expert judgment is one of the answers, just check it. Okay? Just check it. Because PMI is so big on this, and they should be, and I am too. So, if you're clueless, check expert judgment, because they want you to surround yourself with people that know more than yourself.
And
Yep.
that's interesting though because on a team, if you're the project manager, you might have some subject matter expertise. It could be in an area of a project. Maybe you came out of budget or people or HR, and you might have some expertise in leadership and management. But on a project, there's a lot of expertise to go around,
Hmm. Oh, yeah.
right? There are how many domains of expert judgment,
Hmm.
right?
Oh, exactly.
And so what we're talking about is the team lead drawing that out of people
Exactly.
for the benefit of the team. And so another thing that a book I like called The Knowledge Illusion, why we there's a subtitle to it that has to do with why we don't know what we think we know. But in that book he talks about shared knowledge and shared intent,
Hmm.
right? So high
Yep.
performing teams build a shared knowledge, mening I
Hmm.
understand something more about how you see something
Hmm.
than I did before. We understand individually
Hmm.
how others see the project, see the client, see the task, see a problem. That shared knowledge enables us to have greater shared intent. We can work better
Right.
together on the
Right.
basis of that shared knowledge.
Right.
And that shared knowledge and shared intent, I think, is sort of ought to be the result of what you and I are talking about. A greater shared
Exactly.
knowledge and a greater shared intent ought to be the result of what we're talking about.
Right. Exactly. And part of what we need to do is, as elders in project management, is to communicate that and
Yeah,
encourage PMs to
yeah,
let go. It's okay not to know everything.
yeah.
And the worst thing you can do, because even if you did know everything, you're in the weeds and you
Yeah,
don't see the bigger picture.
that's
This
right.
is why you have other people around you to be in the weeds.
That's right.
But it's also, it goes the other direction too. Your team members have to respect your role
Yeah, that's
and
right.
have to understand that you're accountable to the results. And this is where the difficulty comes in, because your team members have to realize that, well, Joe doesn't have to know all the answers, and he doesn't have to. He's looking for us to be trusted advisors.
Right,
He's going to listen to us, but we're going to respect him as he represents the project moving forward.
right.
So this also goes back to getting on the same page, right? We
Yeah,
both have to have
yeah.
mutual respect. Our team and our project manager have to have mutual respect to each other. And when I came up through the ranks, it wasn't like that. The project manager
Was in
they were
charge.
the CEO, and you just did what they did. You did what they told you.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
if they told you to do something wrong or do something that was, not the best way of doing it, you did it that way. Period.
That's
As the
changed a
years go
lot. Yeah,
by,
yeah,
I think, this is why I'm passionate about this,
yeah,
because I want to train the younger folks to think
yeah.
differently.
Okay, that's good.
And if I'm teaching the right things, it's only because, quite frankly, I've had big successes and I've had glorious failures, and all of it can, comes to the table, comes to the classroom.
Lessons. Yeah,
Yeah. So if I can help a younger person do it
yeah.
a little bit better
You
and have a
like that.
different
Yeah,
mindset,
you
I
like
hope it
that.
pays off for them.
Covered a lot of good stuff. Was there something that we touched on you wanted to come back to, or we didn't get to that you want to talk about?
The only thing, and I made a couple of notes, I'm big on keywords. I'm big on, there are key phrases or key words that when you're talking 10,000 foot
Yeah.
at this type of conversation. And, my keywords are in any project, in any communication, to get on the same page, keywords like collaborate,
Mm-hmm.
keywords like active listening, reflective listening.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean you don't have input. So other
No.
words are
Right.
like persuasion and influence, presenting influence.
Yeah.
And I think the other word that we didn't talk too much about, I mean, I'm not a negotiation expert, you are, but knowing your BATNA. And as
Mm-hmm.
I understand BATNA, that's your, correct me if I'm wrong, that's your bottom line.
Mm-hmm.
That's the line where you say anything below this, I can't agree to. And as project managers, you're surrounded by, in my experience, I've been fortunate. I've been surrounded by really good technical people.
Uh-huh.
And really good technical people always want to make the customer happy. They are saying, I've had people come into my office, Joe, I did this, I did that. And because they're going to love it, the customer's going to love it. They're going to ask for it anyway. And I want to do this and I want to do that. And I'm like, whoa, wait a minute.
Yeah.
Hey, great idea.
Yeah.
And I agree with you. But good technical people are not sitting in your chair. They're not seeing the cost.
Right.
They're not seeing
Right.
the schedule slippage. They're not seeing the expectations
Yeah.
that I have to reset after you've made this product souped up. I mean, I had a situation once that we had a technical guy, souped up or made a particular product run faster,
Uh-huh.
and the client loved it.
Uh-huh.
They loved it. We were tasked with installing and configuring one little product.
Uh-huh.
And the customer had bought like $10 million worth of software products.
Uh-huh.
These were service assurance tools. And he decided, in all his best interests and all his best intentions, hey, I'm going to reconfigure it. It's going to run faster, and the customer's going to love it. And it did run faster, and they did love it, right?
Yeah.
And then he says, the customer comes back to me and says, Joe, why doesn't the other $10 million worth of products run this fast? So you see, my point is, as leaders, we also have to, we're seeing the big picture that
Right.
our experts may not be seeing,
Right.
right? So understanding and communicating to them. And I used to tell my folks, look, I love you. You guys know I love you. But before you go to our customers
Yeah.
with these great ideas, please just come to me first,
Yeah.
and let's you and I kick it around, and let's
Yeah.
see strategically how we can work this idea in
Yeah.
or not, so
Yeah.
we can share the big picture. So I think in our even in a servant leadership model, we have to understand where's our bottom line. We might refuse to tiptoe into
Yeah.
an area that just puts us in quicksand.
Well, the leader is always making trade-offs.
Yes.
You're always making decisions about trade-offs of one
Right.
kind or another, and there are people who have a part of a project who don't see those trade-offs, don't see maybe any or most of those
Any of them,
trade-offs.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's not their job. They shouldn't see
Exactly.
them. That's my job.
Exactly. But the smart thing is what you're saying, which is come to me so we can talk about it, because look, here's how it goes, Joe. They come to you and say, we want to make this go faster, and you say, but the client might ask why the rest of the product they buy from us doesn't go. And they go, I hadn't thought about that. Now, maybe there's a solution to that
Yeah, right.
that emerges.
Right.
Wouldn't have emerged without that conversation. But
Right.
also wouldn't have emerged if you had said, oh, hell no, just forget it. Just don't go
Right.
there.
Right.
There's you started off this whole episode saying challenge, or sort of the heart of the matter of getting on the same page, is about communication.
Mm-hmm.
And your example of making the bed and what that meant as but see, that's, and like you said, we all have that, we bring that
Yep.
baggage, that experience to a conversation. So what I've been thinking about lately, I'm working on a guidebook that will get into this, is what does each of us see in a situation, and why those things? You make
Mm-hmm.
something of it, why do you make that particular thing of it and not something else? You
Mm-hmm.
think we should do something about a situation as a means to an end. Why that thing, and why that end, why that means, why that end, and not some other? Everybody's got those answers.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe they're explicit and ready to be stated. Maybe they're implicit and need to be thought through a little bit more to articulate.
Mm-hmm.
I think when we decide what we should do on a team, all of what I just described to you is implied. Someone has run through that, even if it's intuitively. The more we can make that explicit, the more we have to talk about amongst each other. And the
Mm-hmm.
more opportunity arises, the more sort of some magic can happen, where someone goes, I would go, geez, Joe, I didn't know that you were thinking about that. Well, now that I realize that, hey, I've done this before.
Mm-hmm.
Would it work now?
Yep.
Right? You open up more possibilities, and maybe that
Yep.
communication is the art of the possible.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you still have to balance things. You can't do everything that's possible. There isn't time, there isn't budget, there is not the right project for it. But it's best to surface those things, go with what you can, hold back on what you can't use.
Mm-hmm.
But I also think it creates besides the merits of the project, I think it creates within the team an experience that people don't always have. It's like, wow,
Mm-hmm.
he really did want to know. He said he did, and he really wanted to know. He really listened. We
Right.
put into place as many ideas as we could, and we had to back burner some, but we'll get to them another project or another sprint, right? I think you build a different way of working together, which is part of what you said you were passionate about at this stage of your career, which is I'm going to help younger people see how to do that.
Mm-hmm. Right.
See those possibilities and see
Right.
that that's something that they should be aspiring to,
Right.
not just how to build a work breakdown structure.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. And a heavily dependency-driven project schedule that matches the WBS. Yeah, I get you. Unfortunately, I got to do both. It makes my
Yes.
job so challenging.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. But
Yeah.
that's fair, because that's life, and they're going to
Yeah.
pass a test to get certified, and they're going to
Yeah.
run a project where they have to do both.
Right. Right. Exactly.
But that's okay. It's best to be explicit about it and say, look, this
Exactly.
is the reality of it, and probably back in the day when the command and control was more the norm, it was still the case, Joe, that it could have been
Yep.
done both ways. It was just being
Right.
ignored.
Right.
It was overemphasis on,
Yeah.
and like you said, you can't overemphasize the other way. You can't overemphasize collaboration. You can't
Yep.
overemphasize fact finding, discovery.
Yep.
You could take forever
Yep.
and run out of budget and time and not get the job done.
Right. Right.
It's always a balance.
Exactly. Exactly. And you made a good example when you said I could just stand and say to that technical person, "We're not doing it. Go away." Right.
Yeah.
Stay focused on your project. Well,
Yeah.
let's look at the bigger picture. With this person, they're saying, "Oh, well, number one, Joe doesn't respect me.
Right.
Number two is, and it runs deep. It runs deep. They could say, my father spoke to me the same way. He didn't listen to me either."
That's true. That's true.
And all of a sudden, you just lost a good, valuable team member. So every time you need to work with that team member, 6 months, a year on something else, that person's going to say, "Well, Joe doesn't listen to me anyway."
Yeah.
And it really makes it for a terrible dynamic, for a team dynamic.
Good point.
We think as leaders, well, if I give direction and I shut somebody down, they're just going to move on. It doesn't. These things run deep. It's a challenge. This is why I say servant leadership is hard. We got to come out of our typical ways of thinking and think on the bigger picture.
Well, and the things that run deep can work in our favor too if we learn how to, right? Because ideally, you got a whole person come into the project, not just
Right.
their technical expertise.
Exactly.
And look, Joe, the truth is that's where we didn't talk about expert judgment. You used the phrase a couple of times, and I meant to ask you what the definition of it. But that's what expert judgment is not just technical in nature. It's much more.
Yep.
It could be moral and ethical, right?
Yes.
It could be
Yes.
some business savvy. It could be some people savvy. There's a lot going on in expert judgment. And maybe implied in any expert judgment is trade-offs between these things.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
And so it's something to cultivate in somebody, which is what you're saying. You like the training these days to try to teach people to do both, to know the PMBOK, know how to do the basics of the project management, but when you apply the basics, you're doing it with other human beings. You're doing it with people,
Right.
and you want
Yes,
the best
not robots.
That's right. And you want the best of them on your project.
Yes.
Because you get the best results, and like you said, 6 months or a year from now, they're going to want to work with you again.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Joe, we go back 20 years. I've always enjoyed our conversations, and I've learned from this one and had a lot of fun.
Yeah, me too. It was fun. I enjoyed it.
Thank you, my friend. I appreciate it.
All right, Lou.
All right,
hey,
Joe.
have a good day.
You too. Bye-bye.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
And that's how we see it, my friends. I want to thank Joe for recording today's episode. You can find it at iseewhatyoumean.castos.com, plus all the usual places. Send questions and suggestions through the app. Subscribe and give me a 5-star rating, unless you can't, in which case, tell me why. And join me next week when we take another look at how to get on the same page and stay there, unless we shouldn't.